Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Black Lightning. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's focus on Jeff's side of things. Jeff's having this recurring nightmare about him fighting Tobias, and obviously, it's like, as we've seen for the past couple episodes, Jeff is just kind of consumed by this rage inside of him, and he kind of doesn't know what to do with it. At first, he's bringing up all this stuff about, in his therapy session about how, obviously, he's like, I don't know, the fact is, I lost my best friend, what's happened in Freeland. It's like, no, you're God, what was the word she was using? Essentially, you're diverting from the situation. So, what does it really mean? And for him, it's just he can't be the man that he was before. Everything, now it's figuring out who he is without Black Lightning, because it's been a part of him. No matter how much he's denied it, even that time when he wasn't Black Lightning, it was still a part of him. This is his first time fully pushing it away after everything, after fully embracing being Black Lightning. He even talks about it later on. He kind of gave up on Jefferson Pierce and kind of embraced more of Black Lightning, and now finding that new balance of who am I without Black Lightning? Who, if I can't be that man again, after everything I've gone through, all that's inside of me now, I can't be Black Lightning right now. I can never be Black Lightning again. He doesn't see there even being any hope for that down the road. So trying to figure out things on his own front, and so he finds out, ends up following his friend Marcel, who's also, like I said, a teacher at Garfield. Finds out he's doing underground fights for Lala, which is messed up in the grand scheme of things, considering the 100 is responsible, one of its members is responsible for killing your son. But I guess it's Lala kind of makes it right, but I don't know if that necessary conversation went down between him and Marcel. I think it's a situation of Lala did that more so because it's more it's not even for him. It's no, it's for me. You drew too much damn attention. Now you put me in this complicated position with Blackbird. You drew unnecessary attention to me and my business, and you've actually interrupted my business. Now I got to make this peace treaty with the Cobras because of you. And so kind of punishing him. And it's take out the trash. We don't know if Devontae killed him or not. It could have just been tossing him back on the street after beating the crap out of him. Who knows? But Jeff ends up following Marcel there. He had been winning all the fights up until now. But this new guy ends up beating the crap out of Marcel, and so Jeff wants to jump in the ring next. Part of me wants to because part of me was figuring. I'm curious whether or not this is going to be a continuous thing for him, because he's got a lot of anger, but I mean he's still going down the path of, hey, I don't think he's going to do anything that's going to help Lala in the long run, because Lala's a lot of people are suffering right now. He's I'm bringing sort of industry to Freeland, because obviously in his own mind it's I've helped Freeland. While Freeland was struggling with Markovians last season, I stepped in, I helped Freeland. I'm the one that put food on people's tables, I put money in people's pockets. I'm still helping this community rebuild, and obviously I'm still not getting the respect I deserve, at least he believes he deserves. And so I was wondering whether this will be a continuous thing where Jeff uses this as an excuse to kind of outlet some of his anger. Could still potentially go down that route, but like I said, I don't think he'd do that just because it would mean lining Lala's pockets, helping Lala, and it's I'm not trying to help you in the 100 benefit. So he ends up in the ring with the guy, but obviously he's kind of at a disadvantage because he's not going full throttle with his powers. But then I think he kind of gives him, in that moment, and it's such an interesting aspect because you see it a little bit during the dream sequence. It's when he starts surging his lightning, and it changes from that blue to that kind of reddish blue, and it's I think that's kind of representing the fact is that he's kind of pushing his powers to the limit. But once again, his suit helps regulate his powers, so he can go a little full throttle. He can't do that in his natural body, or he kind of burn himself out, cause a lot of damage. So I think in that moment, his eyes kind of flare that reddish blue, and he just kind of surges himself up, ends up beating the dude. But what was interesting, because Devontae was don't you think you should take Mr. Pierce out? He might kill him. That dude might kill Mr. Pierce, but he's nah, I don't think so. So I think Lala has on some level knows that he's Black Knight. I'm trying to remember if that came up in the past. I don't think he knows. Tobias is the only one only bad guy that knows the truth about him. But he might have his suspicions. But in that moment, like, obviously he doesn't flex too much of his power, but I think it was enough for him to get the upper hand in the fight in the long run. But what I thought was interesting about these circumstances too is that Jeff felt good about it, because he's like, I was able to do something. I was able to help someone as Jefferson Pierce, not as Black Lightning. And I think that's going to make him, that solidifies it even more of like, I don't need to be Black Lightning, because for him it's like these powers and everything, because he has a conversation with Lynn, or really, because it's like I said, he's just so angry that he's not really having the conversation she should, because he's yelling at Lynn about like using these powers, once again calling her a hypocrite, because it's like, you know, hypocrisy looked good on you, because it's like 10 years ago you asked me to give up being Black Lightning, and I did. And now look at the circumstances. Like, you're up here. Like, for her, it's like about understanding powers, trying to understand how Jennifer's powers work so that she could better help her children. It's like, I'll stop this the moment you suit up again. But he's like, I'm never going to suit up again, because for him, it's like, he's like, you're not like us. You don't realize, like, these powers do more damage than good, because for him, it's like, being Black Lightning and having these powers, like, what good has it done him? You know, it's, for him, he feels like it's caused nothing but tragedy and misery around him. So to be able to do something as Jefferson Pierce, helping out Marcel, like, hey, you can live here. I'm assuming it's his old house that he even with, you know, his old house that he lives in. He's kept it all these years, and obviously it has, you know, I'm sure good and bad memories for him. At least I think that's supposed to be what that is. But he's let Marcel stay there, and it's like, you know, it's like he was, you know, when you want to talk to social services to get your kids back, talk to me, and I'll put in a good word, and I'll try to help you out. So it's like trying to do more for the community as Jefferson Pierce than he did as Black Lightning. So I think that's such an interesting dynamic for him. Even giving the new suit to Gammy, like, yeah, do whatever you want to with it. Just, I want you to be happy for me, because I think for him, he feels like he's found some clarity, but I don't think that clarity will last. Like, because I don't think he's dealt with the underlying issues. I think all that rage and that anger, that confusion, that sadness, it's all there. I think just in this moment, he thinks he found the solution. I think it's only temporary, but we'll ultimately have to wait and see. And since I brought her up, let's talk about Lynn. Lynn actually went through kind of some breakthroughs during her session, where she ends up kind of discovering, like, okay, so we end up finding out, for one, both her parents served in the military, and so did her brother. And that actually kind of made her feel like an outsider in her family, because it's like her parents are like, no, the military will be tedious for you. Like, and obviously she kind of had to find another route to kind of excel at. And it was almost like she kind of did it in response, a little almost out of spite, because of like her family, like, cause you know, it's like, oh, like she ends up kind of talking about it, like Jeff kind of brought up those old wounds again the moment him as well as her kids are like, you're not like us, you don't belong. She feels like an outsider in her own family, as well as in the same regard of like, in both her families, the one of her own making, and as well as her own, you know, mom and dad and brother, making her feel like an outsider. So that's why she struggles so hard. Like, that's where her addiction comes from, wanting to feel like she belongs, wants to feel super in her own right, because if she doesn't, she feels like she doesn't belong, especially amongst her family, who's you know, made of people who are extraordinary, you know, Black Lightning and Thunder. Like, you just feel even more like an outsider, you know. That can't be the easiest thing, just being like the one person in that family who's normal, who doesn't have any powers. So of course you're going to latch onto that, and she realizes that's kind of like the underlying issue for everything for her is that, you know. And I think that did bring about some insight and kind of made her realize, you know, why she's kind of done what she's done in the long run. So I thought that was kind of a fascinating discovery. And, you know, at the end of the day, her therapist was saying, you just have to be you, and like, try just doing that going forward. Don't try to be something else. Don't try to be somebody else. Excel in who you are, because it's almost like no matter what you're a part of, you're a geneticist, you study a lot about metas as well. Like, you're at the top of your field, and it's almost like it's not good enough because you're not the same as your family. It's okay to kind of be your own person. Embrace being you, you know, continue to excel at just being you. Now, what I find so fascinating is, obviously, the moment she got that card, like, oh, want for dinner, I'm like, it's not Jeff, it's Tobias. And it turns out to be Tobias. And for him, he's looking at this as an opportunity. He's like, hey, I can give you the research funds, because there's someone I know that's going through ASL ALS, and my sister went through that, and she's gone now, but he's like, I still want to do some good, but obviously for Lynn, it's like, I'm not buying it. Like, these are mind games. You never tell people immediately what you want. I know who you are. I know the monster that you are. He's like, you can say all that, but for him, it's also a thing of, I also know it's weird that he's using Lynn, but I think on some level, maybe there is some part of him, well, because he knows he could use Lynn in the long run, but also he knows this is going to hurt Jeff in some shape or form. What did he say? He said, I'm going to take everything you love piece by piece, one thing at a time. And I think in his own right, this is going to be his way of corrupting Lynn, and is like, that's going to be like the biggest FU to Jeff. I think is kind of how he's looking at that. And I thought that was interesting. But what I found most fascinating is he says, I just need you to be you, Lynn. And the fact is, he just happens to use the exact wording that her therapist had just said to her. Like, it makes me wonder, is he paying that therapist to get information on them? Like, is he trying to exploit Jeff and Lynn's weaknesses? So that's why I'm like, I just think it's interesting. Like, he just happens to say the things that's going to trigger Lynn, because it's like, despite Tobias being Tobias, like, him wanting you for you is, especially feeling at this point in time not 100% wanted by her family in many different regards. So the timing is just interesting. Like, so part of me wonders, is he getting information from the therapist? A little bit similar to the therapist in Ozark season 3, if you haven't seen season 3. Just kind of how parts of her story is a little bit different, but kind of similar in that same vein. I wonder, is it going to be something like that where I just think it's that wording. I mean, it could just be like coincidence, and maybe that's just the point of it, like to be like, oh, like I said, he happens to say this at the point in time she needs to hear that and needs to be herself. Or I feel like I'm leaning more towards, I think he's setting that up to be like, oh, like, I'm here to kind of help you, because I want you to be you. Your superpower, Lynn, is how smart you are. No one else recognizes and gives you credit for it, but that is your superpower. You aren't empowered like the rest of your family, but you're super in your own way. And making her feel special in that regard, even though it's coming from Tobias, she's at kind of a point where I think she needs it. So I don't know. We'll see in the long run, especially if he's willing to fund her. So it's the thing of like, yes, like, if I take something bad and do something good with it in the long run, and also like, it'll help, it's like, probably even hearing that, like, hey, be the black woman, and you'll be the black woman they talk about in history, the woman who cured ALS, so we'll see kind of where that goes. Granted, things turn very badly when Jeff shows up and sees them together, because he was like, oh man, she got to me first, because he wanted to make things right with Lynn. He's like, I've been sulking this entire year, I want to make things right with Lynn. Goes to the dinner expecting like, oh, she's the one that set the whole thing up, and to find them together, his arch nemesis with his wife, can't be the easiest thing. Now, they're already on a rocky road. This is going to send them spiraling, especially because Jeff wanted to apologize, and what that's going to turn into. Like, she's like, how, especially if the kids find out too, it's like, whoa, you were sitting down with Tobias. She'll probably be like, no, he invited me. That doesn't mean, but then it's also going to be a thing of, doesn't matter, like, how could you go? How could you sit down with them? It might be a thing of they lose a little trust in her, and that might even send her down further into Tobias' clutches, feeling like her family, where she's already an outsider, kind of turns their back and pushes her away even further. Could be the complicated route we go down. But other than that, obviously Gambi continues his infiltration in Amano Vista. In particular, getting closer to Helen. Now, Helen tried to say, like, hey, these weapons, hey, they can be lethal, sure, but they have a safety setting, so they can be used by everyone. Gambi had it set to its lowest setting, tested it on Jeff's old suit, and it punched a hole right through it. Because there's some unknown energy source, which I'm sure that might be an element to this story, finding out what that necessary energy source is. I'm wondering, are we going to find out they're actually using a meta, like maybe absorbing like a meta's powers and kind of using it as a core energy piece to these weapons, because TC was analyzing it, and it's mainly mechanical, so there's no actual machine computer there. But there is that energy source that he was kind of tapping into that he felt like it was odd. So I'm assuming that's the core of this. So it'd be interesting if they're using a weapon that could kill men. Because even she was saying like, oh, like maybe that's without the safety on. you know, because he's at the lowest setting, but that doesn't necessarily, that means what it's like with the safety on. But still, the lowest setting is able to punch through Black Lightning's suit. And this is going to be something not only used, it's mainly supposed to be used for metas, but it can be used against humans as well. This thing is, deadly. So how Gambi handles that's going to be interesting. Because obviously he just wanted to examine it, so he kind of borrowed one on the low, quote unquote. And it's going to be interesting to see how that storyline ends up playing out. Another side of things, kind of a little bit more uplifting, is, Anissa, is there with Grace, and Grace wakes up. And then once again, I still don't understand what that tiger situation was from last episode. Like I said, maybe it's just a thing of, like, she had Grace on her mind and she just needed to get away for a little bit. Because obviously the whole conversation of, for one, she hasn't really been out and about in general since she discovered her powers and became Thunder. But maybe that was just what that was. Like that tiger she saw, like I said, we never got any explanation for that. I guess it was just supposed to be she had Grace on the mind. She just needed to kind of get away, just her worries and everything. But, she was telling Grace about the good she was able to do. It's like, okay, had to get a little violent, but I was able to do something good, But Grace luckily wakes up, and it's like, she asked Morgan to, get ordained so that they could get married, because it's like, obviously they were going down that route last season, but things got interrupted. But it's like, hey, we have this opportunity now. This isn't about my family. This is us. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I love you. So we see them kind of getting hitched. So to have Grace back is good. I'm curious to see what that kind of means for Anissa's story going forward. Obviously, starting her own family, especially considering her family's, kind of in the issues that they are in. That this seems like I said, this is a season where the Pierce family, it's always, they kind of split, they kind of come back together, but obviously they are pulling in opposite direction in many different regards. So I'm interested to kind of see, like, this might be even Anissa's way of kind of pulling away and kind of going her own route. You guys will always be my family, but I want to go off and start my own family with the woman I love. So we'll see how things kind of turn out on that front. Other than that, there's the Jennifer side of things, where, the narrative that's created, then, she gets the nickname Lethal Lightning. It's about the whole thing of, obviously, it's like edited footage of her using her power, causing property damage. And it's like, yeah, you should kind of get your powers more under control and you wouldn't cause as much property damage, which I love Jennifer being like, what are you talking about, miss? I come crashing down and basically break the pavement every time I come landing, and you can walk, And, so I thought that was interesting. I mean, it's never good when the news has to, like, depict you in a certain way, once again, especially when certain people create this narrative. I even love that dude being like, there's no superhero insurance, which is kind of interesting because, like, even though I've never watched it, I know that was the premise of it, is that, that's what the show Powerless was about helping people getting caught up in the crossfire of superheroes, because that was specifically set in the DC universe. So I'm wondering, is that kind of implying that there is nothing like that in this continuity, or at least it doesn't exist? Because Marvel, there is the Marvel thing that's kind of the equivalent. I was wondering, there's a version of that in Marvel that I was wondering if DC necessarily had their branded, like, equivalency. I had to look it up because I couldn't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was Damage Control. That's Marvel's version. So I don't know if DC has, like, a named branded one like that. But, like I said, it might not exist in its continuity, but hearing, like, superhero, like I said, that doesn't come up that much. Obviously, like, we've seen, like, storylines of, like, oh yeah, the casualties that come about because of, like, superheroes doing their thing. In particular, Arrow's kind of cover that a little bit, in particular just of how, like, Oliver handled stuff from time to time, being the, I'm killing people type of thing. But it's never like this. That's never really been covered in any of the superhero shows necessarily, so I just think that was so fascinating for them to kind of bring that up. Granted, it was mainly meant to be a detriment against, Jennifer, because it's like, I'm doing good, I'm helping people. So she goes to TC for help, trying to find the person with the original video, which she ends up meeting. It's just some kid, which I find ironic, her being like, oh, you're some kid. It's like, Jennifer, you're a kid. What? I mean, I guess it's like, you're about out of high school, getting ready for college, so I guess it's like, yeah, but still, it's like, you're still a kid. What are you talking about? So I just thought that was interesting. But obviously, it starts down this path of, like, she wants the original video out there unedited so that people can see the good that she's doing. And it's kind of like a thing of, like, the kid's like, okay, can I get a selfie with you? I follow you, you follow me. And she gets TC to set up some social media for her, which is interesting because I don't The only other superhero I'm aware of, and they kind of lean into this, is Spider-Man during the most recent. I don't know if it's in Miles Morales as well, but in the PS4 Spider-Man, there is like a social media app that, you know, Spidey does kind of have his social media. I mean, it makes sense. We're in that day and age that, you know, social media. I mean, and I think that's the whole point too. Like, social media can, you know, be used to show as well as skew the facts. You know, you can kind of put your own narrative out there and even skew the narrative if you want to. Obviously, that kind of got done in Jennifer's case of her, the narrative being skewed and her kind of putting the truth out there. But it's also like, once you've opened that box, like, it's complicated, because now it's also going to get to the point, like, are you, because we saw elements of this a little bit early on in the show with Anissa, because it seemed like sometimes she was doing her superhero thing, she was kind of showboating to the camera, so it's like, that's not what this is about. It's a thing of like, now we might start getting in the lane of things where you might start showing off a little bit more, like you're on social media. I mean, I guess it's, once again, it's a byproduct of the day and age, considering her age and everything. Like, it makes sense, but it's still like, it can lead down a dangerous road, because it might start coming off like, oh, all you're doing is posting. Like, it might bring into question all the heroing you do. It's like, are you doing it for the right reasons? Or are you doing it just to showboat? It can be a double-edged sword, so it's going to be interesting. Especially as we can see, like, she, you know, because TC was commenting on how she came in looking a little like she had been partying. He's like, yeah, when I'm up in the atmosphere, she's like, an absorbing energy. It kind of, like, taps me. And he was like, well, stop doing that. Like, you don't know what the consequences are. She's like, it's fine. And in that moment, she's looking at her hand. TC doesn't see this, but like, her hand turns into particles and it like fades away. And it's like, if you're not careful, you know, I mean, similar thing happened during obviously Crisis, like when their Earth disappeared, and luckily she kind of blinked out of their existence, luckily, so it didn't like affect her necessarily at that time. But still, it's kind of a similar thing. Like, she might like turn into nothing but pure energy. Like, and if she's not careful, because it's like I brought up, she's kind of gotten her own addiction, because she likes the feeling. Like, it almost seems like it just like absorbing all the energy. It makes her feel good, but she relies on it too much, and pushing her body like that, absorbing all that energy might, as we see, like, might be turning her into pure energy. So when it's all said and done, she might not ever be able to go back to being on a human form. She might live as just pure energy, it's pure lightning, you know. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where things kind of go on that front as well, you know. But because I think it's going to get to the point, like, obviously coinciding with this social media stuff, is at one point in time, you know, because this whole thing about control, like, you know, which we see everyone's kind of losing. I think Anissa's the only one that's kind of grounded. Her, you know, I think she's the only one at the moment kind of grounded. Lynn's kind of free falling. Jeff is kind of free falling, and so is Jennifer's in the process. I think she thinks she's grounded. I think Jeff thinks she's grounded. I think Lynn thinks she's grounded, but I think they're all free falling to a certain extent, and I think that she's going to lose control at one point in time, and especially with this social media angle, because social media can blow back on you. In the biggest degree, we've seen that time and time again. Like, social media is a wild and fickle beast that people can praise and love you one moment, and then immediately the mob can turn on you. You know, so especially in her light of her being like this superhero, she's putting out this narrative of like, oh, look at the mainstream media, like at least certain people in the media skewing things. But when things kind of turn ugly, that mob, that fan base she's kind of accruing, like people following her and just all the positive attention, can easily turn negative, you know, with the wrong misstep. So, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening going along those routes. I'm very interested to see where ultimately all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.